For almost a year, I've been telling you this. Truls is the most dangerous player because he is unreadable. He changes pace, he changes rhythm, he changes timing. He changes the feeling of the rally. You never settle against him. You never feel safe against him. You never really know what comes next. And that is why so many people kept missing the point. They looked at the flash and they looked at the noise. They looked at the hype. I looked at the danger. Because the most dangerous player is not always the loudest player. The most dangerous player is the one who makes great players uncomfortable. The one who makes elite players doubt. The one who makes the match feel unstable from start to finish. That player is Truls Moregard. People called me crazy. Good. Now look at what just happened. Europe's number 2 stood in front of him. He lost. Europe's number 3 stood in front of him. He lost. Same final. Same pressure, same title, same Truls. So now what? Now what for all the people who laughed? Now what for all the people who thought this was just talk? Now what for all the people who thought Truls was just stylish, just creative, just different? No, he is not just different. He is dangerous. He is the boss. He is the man who takes your rhythm, your comfort, your plan, your confidence, and breaks all of it point by point. That is why he is number 1 in Europe. Not because it sounds nice. Because when the pressure became brutal, he stood above everybody else. And on a good day, on a really good day, he is not only Europe's problem, he is the world's problem. That is why I said it. That is why I kept saying it. And that is why the table keeps proving it. The story began with the giant aura of Saarbrucken. The story began with Fan Zhendong's presence. The story began with the feeling that this team was too big to fail. But when the final needed a killer, when the final needed a closer, when the final needed one man to walk through fire twice and come out with a trophy, that man was not anybody else. That man was Truls Moregard. He beat Felix Lebrun. He beat Alexis Lebrun. He took the title. He took man of the match. He took the final. So let's stop playing games. Let's stop acting confused. Let's stop pretending the hierarchy is still open. In Europe, the boss is Truls Moregard. And when he is locked in, he can look any player in the world straight in the eyes. That is what people didn't want to hear. Now they have to watch it. They called me crazy. Now the scoreboard is laughing for me. Truls Moregard is Europe's boss, and on the right day, he is a nightmare for the world. Okay, my friends, so now let's do a deep analysis and let's begin properly. For almost a year, I have been telling you that Truls is one of the most dangerous players in the entire world and definitely the boss in Europe, because he is unreadable. He is unpredictable. He changes the pace all the time. He changes the rhythm all the time. He changes the feeling of the rally all the time. You cannot settle against him. You cannot relax against him. You cannot enter his head. You cannot trap him in one simple pattern. And that is exactly why I kept saying it. Not because I wanted a hot take. Not because I wanted noise. Because I was watching the matches and I was seeing something people did not want to admit. I was seeing a player who becomes more dangerous the more uncomfortable the match becomes. I was seeing a player who does not need one rhythm. He can play slow, then fast, soft, then violent, calm, then explosive. He can take the air out of a rally and then suddenly hit through you. He can make the match ugly. He can make the match strange. He can make the match emotional, and most importantly, he can make the opponent feel like the ground is always moving. That is why I said it. That is why I kept saying it. And yes, many people were calling me crazy. Crazy. Too emotional. Too high on Truls. Too provocative. Too much. Okay. Now what? Now what? after Saarbrücken. Now what? After the table has spoken again. During my analysis in the live stream sessions I have been doing for the last 12 months, mentioning Truls, and recently regarding the World Team Championships in London 2026, I was already saying the same thing. Truls is the kind of player nobody wants to face in the biggest pressure moments, and now, just days later, in the Hilo Etu Champions League, Men Final 4 on May 17th, 2026, first FC Saarbrücken. TT beat Alliance Nîmes Montpellier 3-2, with Truls Moregard beating Felix Lebrun 3-0, then Alexis Lebrun 3-1, and taking man of the match. France also came into Saarbrücken with fresh momentum from another World Championships bronze in London. So let us stop pretending this came from nowhere. It did not come from nowhere, it came from watching closely. It came from understanding styles. It came from understanding pressure. It came from understanding the table tennis is not only about who looks spectacular. It is about who can destroy your certainty. And that is what Truls does. He destroys certainty. He destroys comfort. He destroys rhythm. He destroys the feeling that the opponent knows what is coming next. That is why he is so dangerous. That is why I have been saying it for so long. And that is why this final in Saarbrücken hits so hard. Because look at the Fan Gendong photos from his Saarbrücken season, not only from the Champions League, from the whole campaign, from all competitions. Look at that aura. Look at that presence. TTBL itself described Fan's arrival as sparking a table tennis boom in Saarland, and his one-season spell at Saarbrücken is already drawing to a close. That whole visual story makes Saarbrücken feel bigger, heavier, more intimidating, more inevitable. That is how this final begins, with aura. With weight, with a feeling of a giant club, with a feeling that Saarbrücken is not just another team. It is a machine. It is a force. It is a team of stars, a team of legends, a team that enters an arena and makes everything feel more serious. And of course it does. When you have Fan Gendong in your season story, the whole club looks bigger. The whole season feels heavier. The whole image becomes more powerful. So the beginning of the story is expectation. The beginning of the story is that Saarbrücken looks like a giant. The beginning of the story is that the whole event feels built for another coronation. So what happened next proved that Truls is the boss. Truls is the most dangerous player when the pressure became absolute. Truls is the player that nobody wants to see across the table when the room gets heavy, when the title gets close, when the points stop being points and become a test of nerve. And what happened now in Saarbrücken did not create that truth. It confirmed it. It confirmed it in the biggest possible way. Because this was not some random league afternoon that people will forget in 2 days. This was the Hilo ittf Champions League. Men Final 4 final on May 17th, 2026. This was Saarbrücken chasing history. This was first FC Saarbrücken TT chasing a 4th consecutive Champions League title and a 3rd title since the Final 4 format was introduced. This was a packed Saarlandhalle. This was a final that went all the way to 3-2. This was pressure. This was expectation. This was legacy. And that is why I keep repeating some phrases in this video. Because the story begins with a giant name. The story begins with Fan Gendong. The story begins with the aura of the Olympic champion. The story begins with the superstar. The story begins with the face everybody sees first when they look at Saarbrücken, Fan Gendong. Because the beginning of the story is expectation. The beginning of the story is the feeling that Saarbrücken has too much strength, too much firepower, too much history, too much class to fall. More than 3,400 spectators were there. The arena was full, the atmosphere was alive. Everything looked set for another coronation. But this is why sport is beautiful. Because sometimes the biggest name introduces the story, and someone else owns the ending. Sometimes the loudest aura at the beginning is not the strongest force at the end. Sometimes the spotlight opens on one man and closes on another, and that is exactly what happened here. Because the first shock of the final did not belong to Saarbrücken at all. It belonged to Alexis Lebrun. Alexis walked in and beat Fan Zhendong 3-0, and then the first punch lands. Alexis Lebrun beats Fan Zhendong 3-0. Immediately, the atmosphere changes. Immediately, the giant feels pressure. Immediately, the favorite is no longer floating. Immediately, the final becomes dangerous. Immediately, all the aura in the world is not enough. Because now the match is not about names. Now, it is about character. And immediately, the whole final changed. Immediately the mood changed. Immediately the pressure changed. Immediately the favorite was not cruising anymore. Immediately the title stopped feeling comfortable. Immediately the question became real. Who is going to carry Saarbrücken now? And this is where Truls enters the story like a real boss. Not like a supporting actor. Not like a side piece in Fan's movie. Not like a talented helper. No, like the man who is about to take ownership of the entire final. Because then comes Truls Moregard against Felix Lebrun. Europe's number 1 against Europe's number 2. And this is the part where I want people to wake up. This is not theory. This is not future talk. This is not fantasy. This is not maybe one day. This is the final. This is the title. This is the real thing, and Truls wins 3-0. But that score is almost too clean, because it hides how violent the match actually was. 15-13? 15-13? 12-10. That is not comfort. That is not a walk. That is control in the middle of fire. That is a player who can breathe when everybody else is suffocating. That is a player who can stay clear when the whole match is trying to pull him into panic. And that is why I say again what I have been saying for almost a year. Truls is the most dangerous kind of player. Not the loudest, not the easiest to market, not the simplest to describe, the most dangerous. Because you cannot lock him into one rhythm, because you cannot play him on autopilot, because you cannot solve him with one pattern and live there for the rest of the match. He keeps changing the picture. He keeps changing the angle. He keeps changing the speed of the story. And that breaks people. This is why, when people called me crazy, I laughed. Because I knew what I was watching. I knew I was not talking about random highlights. I was talking about danger. Real danger. The kind of danger that shows up when the scoreboard gets tight and the crowd gets loud and the title gets close. And now what? Now what after Europe's number 2 stood there and Truls beat him? Now what after that so-called crazy opinion just walked through the front door of a Champions League final and came out with a trophy? And we are still not done. Because then came Darko Djurgic. And this part matters too, because finals are not only built on power, they are built on emotion. Darko was playing with farewell energy. He was playing with history on his shoulders. He was playing with that feeling that some matches are not just matches, they are chapters closing. And he beat Antoine Hachard 3-0 to push Saarbrücken in front again. Officially, this title also came with the backdrop that Darko and Saarbrücken are parting ways after 7 years, while Fan is leaving for Borussia Düsseldorf next season. That matters, because this means the whole final has another layer. This is not just a trophy. This is one of the last great explosions of this version of Saarbrücken. This is one of the last giant images of this team, as we know it. So, the pressure becomes even bigger. The emotion becomes even heavier. The sense of ending becomes even stronger. And still, the final is not finished. Because Felix comes back and beats Fan 2. Again, the final refuses to die. Again, France refuses to disappear. Again, the Lebruns show the level, the courage, the quality, the threat. And this is why I keep saying respect to them, massive respect, because this was not fake hype. France had just come out of London 2026 with another medal, and the Lebrun brothers were central to that run. This final mattered precisely because the French side arrived with real form, real belief, and real status, which makes what happens next even bigger. Because now it is 2-2. Now the season is hanging over one table. Now the title is hanging over one match. Now the crowd is no longer watching. Now the crowd is holding its breath. And who has to go back into the fire? Truls. Again. That is what makes this monstrous. And he did not beat one Lebrun and then hide behind the team. He had to go back into the middle of the storm. He had to walk back into the pressure. He had to do it one more time. And the opponent now is Alexis Lebrun. So think about what that means. Europe's number 2 first, Europe's number 3 next. Same final, same trophy, same pressure, same chaos. And Truls beats him too. 3-1, finished, closed, sealed, and after that, he gets the Man of the Match award. So let me ask the people who were calling me crazy one more time. Now what? Now what? After Truls beat both Lebrun brothers in the same final and walked away as the decisive man of the day. Now what? After the pressure got bigger and he got clearer. Now what? After Europe's biggest club final turned into another argument in favor of everything I have been saying for almost a year. And this is where I want to get really sharp, not toxic. Sharp? There is a difference between excitement and authority. There is a difference between hype and hierarchy. There is a difference between brilliance and command. Felix and Alexis are brilliant. They are elite. They are spectacular for the sport. They are absolutely among the biggest names in Europe. But in Saarbrücken, hierarchy won. In Saarbrücken, command won. In Saarbrücken, the table looked at all the noise, all the speed, all the confidence, all the electricity, and still said one thing. The boss is Truls. That is the message. That is the whole message. And I do not need to insult anyone to say it. In fact, the cleaner you say it, the harder it lands. Because the truth does not need decoration. The truth only needs evidence. And the evidence is brutal. Alexis beat Fan. Truls beat Felix. Darko beat Hatchard. Felix beat Fan. Truls beat Alexis. That is the movie. That is the script. That is the hierarchy. And in that hierarchy, Truls Moregard stands above the Lebrun brothers in the decisive European club moment of this season. This is why I keep coming back to Sweden too, because Sweden understands something serious about the sport. Not just skill, not just creativity, not just feeling, pressure, discipline, timing, variation, how to survive inside ugly points, how to control the emotional temperature of a match, how to shift the pace without losing the plot. That is why Truls is so dangerous. He is not dangerous only because he can do beautiful things. He is dangerous because he can make the opponent feel unstable. He can make a great player feel unsure. He can make the best athletes in the world feel like they are playing a match that keeps changing shape. And that is why, in my view, he is definitely the boss in Europe and, on a good day, one of the most dangerous players in the whole world. That is my analysis. That is what I've been saying. That is what people mocked, and that is what keeps getting confirmed. In my view, if Truls plays at his absolute best, he is not only a European problem, he is a world problem, and that is exactly why I keep saying something provocative. If you want to truly threaten China, you do not just need two talented stars. You need two players built with this kind of unpredictability, nerve and control. Sweden may have one, but one like this is already enough to shake the whole conversation. Sweden also showed serious power at London 2026 by shocking defending champion China in the group stage. So yes, I want to provoke, but I want to provoke with truth. I want to provoke the people who were comfortable. I want to provoke the people who laughed too early. I want to provoke the people who thought calling Truls dangerous was an exaggeration. Because what exactly do you call it now? What exactly do you call a player who keeps changing pace, keeps changing rhythm, keeps denying comfort, keeps stepping into the biggest moments, and then beats Europe's number 2 and Europe's number 3 in the same final? What exactly do you call that? A coincidence? No. A good weekend? No. A hot streak? No. You call it hierarchy? You call it championship behavior. You call it the sign of a real boss. And that is why this video has to hit hard. Because the point is not only that Saarbrücken won again. The point is not only that the club now has 4 straight Champions League titles. The point is that inside a giant team, inside a super team aura, inside a season that began with Fan Zhendong's gravity, the man who owned the decisive moment was Truls Moregard. Saarbrücken officially made it 4 consecutive Champions League crowns on May 17th, 2026, and the final was decided by the man who beat both Lebruns. That is cinema. That is power. That is why the ending of this story is so strong. The story begins with the massive aura of Saarbrücken. The story begins with the weight of Fan. The story begins with the feeling of a giant club marching toward another title. But the ending belongs to Truls. That is the twist. That is the beauty. That is the brutality. The beginning gave you the biggest name. The ending gave you the strongest man. And that is why, here on this channel, we say it clearly. Not the diplomatic version, not the safe version, the real version. For almost a year, I told you Truls was the most dangerous because he is unreadable, because he changes pace all the time, because he never lets you settle, because you cannot get inside his head, because he breaks your rhythm and then breaks your certainty. People called me crazy. Fine. Now the table has answered for me.